Um, I think everybody knows me. Sebastian, I'm not sure if you and I have actually met in person. So I'm Amer Hussein. I am with Geosyntec, and we are the engineering consultants for Tri-County. So welcome to the meeting. We've got a bunch of updates for you today, and then we've got a few things. We've got one additional item that we'd like to add to the agenda as well. And actually spend a little bit of time on that new topic, which is going to be a final or more formal recharge policy, and that we're in the process of putting together. And I want to get some input with the group. I want to talk a little bit about a working draft document that we've started to put some thoughts together on, and I want to share that with you this morning as well. But let me get into a few updates for the group, and then we'll talk about that in a bit. The LandIQ inundation map viewer. This was a item that Deanna had asked LandIQ to put together using their satellite imagery and other information. Basically, it's a web viewer that allows us to go back in time and see the amount of flooding and where that flooding has occurred, how big an area. It actually gets down into the parcel level, because they've overlaid some of the, you can turn on a layer for the parcel as well. And so it's been quite helpful. It's not just informative this year, but as we continue our conversations with State Water Board and others, I think that information and historical information is going to be very important moving forward. We did use it, quite frankly, when we were evaluating the emergency groundwater recharge policy and the applications that have come in for that. And so that helped us to evaluate some of the claims that were submitted, and come up with some values for them. And I think it's been a very useful tool, and we're continuing to go ahead and keep that information. We are currently continuing to update it. We will probably start to see how long the water is going to be a concern. The floodwaters are going to be a concern, and if it gets to a point where it's outside of the Tri-County area, then we may end up maybe scaling it back. But it's a useful tool, and it is something that Tri-County is currently utilizing. Deanna, did you want to add anything to that, or I was going to give you a pause and give you a chance?
No, you covered that well, and but it is been a good tool, I think, particularly with the emergency recharge policy that we put together. It was a good check and balance on what we were seeing come in applications, and we will continue to use it. So LandIQ does some really good work, and this was one of them, and we're glad that we went ahead and went after that data. Yeah,
I think not only, like I said, is it going to be useful this year, but it's also going to be useful moving forward as well. Okay, some updates on the Tule Subbasin GSP update. There is a meeting with the State Water Board staff. This is the third meeting that the Tule has had with them, and that's going to occur on the 4th. Am I getting that date right? Yeah.
Sorry, somebody was asking me for the link to this meeting. Yes, we have a scheduled meeting with State Water Resource Control Board for the Tule Subbasin on August 4th.
Yeah. The Tule Subbasin, and the primary focus of that meeting is going to be on the revised water level MTs and the SMC section, the Sustainable Management Criteria section, specific to the questions raised by DWR on water levels. So Tom Harder has put together a presentation. Deanna and I are actually going to be having a meeting with the Tule Subbasin folks and other GSA managers later this afternoon, and go through that presentation. One of the challenges that we have is that the State Water Board insists on getting any presentation that you wanted to give them 8 working days in advance. And so you lose almost 2 weeks, that you have to submit this paperwork to them in advance of any meeting. So it's been a bit of a challenge getting meetings scheduled. I do want, let me add a couple other things. Speaking of the State Water Board, this is some additional conversations we've had with them and that Aqua has had with them as well, just for the information for this group. You may have heard me say at our last meeting or even at the board meeting that the schedule for the hearings was had not been approved by the board. And it turns out that I was incorrect, because apparently the schedule for the hearings does not have to be approved by the board. The hearing date itself has to be approved by the board, and that will come out in a notice. But the schedule that some of you saw back in June, that schedule is what the tentative schedule that staff is working forward on. So that December deadline for the Tulare Lake subbasin is what they're moving forward on, and the January deadline for the Tule subbasin is also what they're working. So I may have given you some incorrect information, and I apologize for that, but boy, I was not made clear to us at all, and nor was there any additional communication from board staff saying that schedule that they presented to the board did not require the formal approval of the board. In all of our conversations with the state staff, they constantly make the comment that they are not authorized to make any decisions, that ultimately all decisions have to be made at the board level. And so I guess I just kind of assumed that was going to be the case on a schedule too, like the staff presented a schedule. But bottom line is there is that tentative schedule is in effect, and that's what we need to plan on. And you'll hear me talk a little bit more about that on the Tulare Lake side. So the Tule subbasin is moving forward with this meeting on the 4th, and then they are planning additional meetings with state staff to talk about subsidence as well. Some of the consultants got together. We talked about the subsidence. There was not a consensus made on the subsidence presentation. So we decided to pull that at this time and focus primarily on water levels to give everyone, including state board staff, enough time to comment, discuss, and hopefully they won't approve it, but we do want to make sure that they're in a spot where they would say, yeah, this is something that we would recommend to the board for, the board's approval. So when the meeting will be on the 4th, I would, we'll be happy to discuss that and give you more details of how that meeting went after that date.
Amir, can I ask? So you have a meeting this afternoon with the Tule staff managers?
Yes.
Okay. Do you believe, I'm inferring from your comment that you don't have agreement amongst the consultants on approach to subsidence, that you do have an agreement with regards to water levels, minimum thresholds for water levels?
Yeah, so Tom has prepared some documentation and a presentation that was previously already submitted to state board staff, and that's what we're going to go through with state board staff on the 4th.
So the consensus position of all the managers and so on you've settled in on a different approach to minimum thresholds or actually different levels? Can you give us any hint on the nature of where that agreement is? And then, where is that in relation to what is currently in the GSPs?
Yeah, so in the revised GSP, there are areas specific and including in Tri-County where the water levels are going to be the MTs for that water level, Jeff, is going to be higher than what is currently presented in the 22 GSP. So there are areas across the subbasin where we are basically going to raise water levels and have a higher MT value, and that's what's being discussed now. Again, I'm not giving you exact values because these are all subject to a lot of discussion and ongoing discussion with both the state staff and internal too. So there's at least a consensus about the approach that we wanted to present to state staff. And I'm sorry, I'm being a little I'm being vague on purpose because we give us an opportunity to have that discussion. And I'd hate to tell you that.
And I'm just trying, I'm going to push you as far as you'll let me, but we've got a public process here, right? I mean,
Right.
I can sign into this meeting and I can ask you questions.
Absolutely.
You don't have to answer them. I guess it's a little. I'm encouraged that from what you're reporting that you guys are on the water levels, and that's obviously it was a big part of the letter that DWR sent you, but
right.
Probably more, maybe even more critical in light of the events of the last 6 months is what is the approach to subsidence? So
right, and I agree with you, Jeff, that discussion still needs a lot more a lot more discussion needs to happen on that, because when I say there wasn't consensus, I don't want to imply that everybody was going back to their corner and saying, hey, you're wrong. We don't feel like we've answered all of DWR's questions adequately. There was definitely not an agreement that every question had been adequately addressed, and there was ongoing comments about how we need to maybe address some of these comments differently than what we've done in the past. I didn't answer your question. I felt like I danced around
no,
it.
that's okay. It's very, it's very difficult. I mean, it's a very, very, very tough issue.
Yeah.
And what I have learned in other meetings is that Delano has an approach to subsidence. I may be wrong, but this is what I picked up that was not adopted or embraced by the other members of the Tule Subbasin. So I did have some factual type questions, like the Delano approach to subsidence is apparently based on some sort of modeling that they've done. And, at least with regards to modeling, I mean, there's other modelers that are part of the Tule Basin family. Is there agreement on the science, or how close are we on the science, or how much do we know versus how much, what are the unknowns? So those are all the kind of questions that I'm probing, and we'll keep playing the game here for a while. But I recognize we're kind of in the early innings on.
Yeah, we're in the early innings, but definitely keep asking those questions, Jeff. I've said this numerous times and I say it to you, but I really mean it to everybody in the group. Keep asking those questions, because at the bottom line is we all have to be very comfortable that we are answering those. We swung and missed twice, and we can't afford a third, the third miss. So we want to make sure that this document truly does address those concerns. I will say, just in general, My personal view is that DWR will not accept just model results. We have to do something else. And it's not about, it's not, the model can verify what we're saying we're going to do, but it can't be the basis of what we're going to do. And I think that was part of the ongoing discussions is exactly what role some of this modeling efforts are going to play and things of that nature. I think there needs to be, frankly, a lot more emphasis placed on the actual projects and management actions associated with subsidence.
Yeah, I guess that, my observation, and I'm still kind of looking for the answer to it, but I have not heard anybody definitively say they really know how much water we're taking from below the Corcoran clay. And so I was very interested in the fact that Delano had a, something there regarding subsidence. How do they know? And so what is the credibility of that data? And, what are we going to do to actually get the data that we need? And that may be part of it. I mean, I went through this at Chino. I don't know, Amir, whether you were ever involved in that, the whole Chino debacle. I mean, Tom Harder was. Tom was very involved in Chino.
Right.
And, we had a subsidence issue, smaller in terms of geography, but very similar. A deep aquifer causing subsidence, and how do you figure it out? And despite the fact that there were decades and millions of dollars spent on modeling up to that point, there was a lot we didn't know. And it's a very, you cannot directly observe what's going on under the ground. So you have to infer it by all of these holes that are stuck through these things, and that were for the most part built there for other reasons. So I appreciate the difficulty, but I think the one thing DWR made clear is that this is not an issue that the Tulare Lake and the Tule subbasins can avoid any longer. They have to be dealt with face up.
Yeah, I agree with that statement. The comments make that very clear. And we have to get real with addressing those comments, not the, not more modeling or anything like that. Jeff, I don't think we're that far apart. I just think.
No, hey, you got your role, I got mine. I'm cool.
All right, let me ask if there's any more questions. I don't see any hands up. Okay. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free. We always do this, is to unmute yourself and ask anything. We'll try to get, if we don't get you an answer today, we'll at least get you an answer, or let you know when we can get you an answer. On the Allensworth design, we continue to move forward on the design process. Last time I told you we would have the survey done, the topographic survey done by now, and I unfortunately we haven't received that just yet. We're still waiting for the surveyors to come through. We are in the process of scheduling the geotechnical investigation, the actual field investigation. As you all can imagine, with the rains have stopped, all of the drilling companies are extremely busy right now. So we are in the process of trying to schedule them. It looks like the first availability for the track mounted rig is going to be in September. This is a CPT rig, which is a cone penetrometer testing rig, as opposed to actually drilling holes. And so we would be utilizing the CPT data to help us identify the lithology across the site. And we would be, coordinating closely with Angela Water District before we go on site. And we'll let you know exactly, Carla, what date we have the rig scheduled for. And we obviously want to get out there before it starts raining again, which, if you'd asked me last October if I thought it was going to start raining, you never know, right? So we want to make sure we get out there ahead of time. But yes, right now we're tentatively scheduled for September. In addition to the drilling efforts, Kathy is working on the permitting, and we've applied for a CEQA waiver, but Kathy's also at the process of getting the biological and cultural resource. Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I think that we're gonna go forward with getting a scope out so we can get those pieces done again before it starts raining.
So we have someone at least started some conversations with the biological firm, and Kathy's helping me with defining their scope of work, and getting folks out there to continue with that project as well. I will mention, and Deanna, please feel free to jump in and add the details to this, but Deanna and Kathy both attended a meeting with USDA 2 weeks ago now?
Yeah, it was 2 weeks, the 13th.
The 13th, where USDA, as you can imagine, through the infrastructure bill that was passed last year, they have some money for rural development, rural community development funds, and they were looking for projects. And so Kathy and Deanna presented not the existing Allensworth stuff, because that's already funded, but the conveyance portion of that, which we were trying to get covered under the Sigma Round 2, which was not granted to us. All the Sigma Round 2 money went to the medium and high priority basins, and very, very, very little of that money went to critically overdrafted basins. But so Kathy and Deanna had a really good conversation with USDA, and we're going to be moving forward, and they were very interested in the project.
Very much. And there's some other funding coming out from the state on flood mitigation that we want to explore. We're getting a lot of emails and things on that.
Yeah.
That can help with some of the conveyance issues that we have.
And just as a follow-up, the USDA did reach out to me last night. They left me a message. I returned it, but I haven't heard back again, but they have reached out, and they want to continue the conversation. It was all about funding projects for rural communities. The school district and facility projects, they presented a few of those. There was, I believe, 80,000 available for each of those projects, but when it comes to water projects, the amount was really it was unending for the amount. So it is possible that we can move forward with some funding and begin that work on White River. So that is what we're going to try to move forward, and I'm looking forward to speaking with that representative, hopefully today sometime.
The two projects that we did bring up to USDA, one was, of course, the improvement and channelization of the White River Channel, and the second one was additional ponds. This year made it very clear that there's the potential for a lot more water coming down the White River than what we've seen historically. But every 7 years, it seems like we get some flooding on the White River, and the amount of flooding obviously varies, but we do have some opportunities there to capture that water, and that's what the project is all about, is bringing in more imported water into the Tri-County area. Again, I'm going to encourage anyone who does have questions to please just go ahead and unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'm going to keep moving on. On the Tulare Lake side, Deanna and I and the Tulare Lake GSA managers met last week. A decision was made, and this is going to make Jeff very happy. Decision was made by the Tulare Lake managers that we are going to submit a revised, updated GSP by November of this year. The discussions in the past have been, some options about, and at the board meeting, some of you may have heard me say that we were originally looking at a schedule for October of 24. And that's not the case anymore. The Tulare Lake Subbasin will be submitting a revised document in November of 23. before the hearing, which is, tentatively scheduled for December right now. I did have a conversation with state board staff, our point of contact, yesterday. As far as they know, as of yesterday, they are still on track for that December timeline. They have, of course, they hedge their bets, but as of yesterday, he said that they're still on track for that. So I just want to let you guys know that. So we are in the process of revising that document and working on that. Even as we speak right now, the minute I'm done with this meeting, I'm going to be jumping right back into that document. But we're comfortable that we can make that deadline. We are going to be working very, very closely with the GSA managers to make sure that happens. We are sending out the 90-day notifications here. Those, Deanna, just so you know, those draft documents are done. And as soon as, again, right after this meeting, I'll be sending those out to the GSA managers. We have a meeting scheduled with the state board staff for August 22nd. We have tentative meetings scheduled with them in September and October as well. And so the first meeting, very similar to the Tule Subbasin, is we're going to talk about deficiency 1, which is water levels, and then subsidence and then water quality over the next 2 meetings. We are putting together the presentation of how we're going to respond to the questions raised by DWR. And I don't have anything else to share on that just yet. Some of the presentation is to make sure that the state board is very clear on some of the issues that we did include in the existing document and clarification, but some of it is acknowledgement that we have to change sections of the document, and we're going to discuss and present how we're going to make some of those changes in response to DWR comments. And I definitely do agree, all the things that I said about subsidence on the Tule side are certainly going to be true on the Tulare Lake side, and that's going to be an ongoing discussion. Related to all of this is because we have such a short time frame to turn this document around. The Tulare Lake managers did agree to postpone temporarily the native yield study. So we're going to put the native yield study aside. That's kind of the study that we were going to do to start the allocation discussions on the Tulare Lake side and get a little bit more detailed conversations going. But that'll wait until after the GSP update has been submitted. Questions on Tulare Lake or Dan, anything else that I missed or you want to add?
No, it's a very aggressive timeline. There's a lot of work to be done, and I think the question still is, how are we going to manage to subsidence in the Tulare Lake subbasin? That's the biggest question mark in my mind, and I think and others' minds. So I have a lot of sympathy for our engineering firm as they're trying to figure out how to best manage subsidence in a way that the state will accept it. And unfortunately, we don't know what that is yet. And so we're going to have to be aggressive with whatever we present back to them. And in a short time frame, it's going to be a tough haul, but we're committed to getting it done. So we're gonna do our best to send something back that the state will accept.
Yeah, can I comment, and forgive me, but I think if you look at, well, let's put this, we'll leave. I remember Dave DeGroat talking about the Tule's approach to subsidence. Basically, hey, there's not that much infrastructure down there. It's been sinking for years. Not really taking it, as a big deal. So that's clearly not acceptable to DWR. The problem is very difficult to address. And there's a lot of data. I mean, the reality is we don't know exactly what to do because we don't have the information to inform that. But an acknowledgement that has to be done, that it's serious, and then a plan to get that data. I mean, I think that's a sea change directionally for the GSAs. And I really think in fairness to DWR, if they really think it's a big deal and the subbasins didn't, what else were they going to do? Now it feels like a sledgehammer coming down, but a different attitude, which I think everybody's kind of now got. That's the first, that's the beginning, the foundation on actually moving forward. And I don't think it'd be realistic for the state board or DWR to expect any plan that we can say, yeah, we're gonna solve this. We've got a plan to solve this problem. There's no way we can have a plan to solve this problem. But until you admit you have a problem, you really can't make the kind of progress that we need to make. So I think, just admitting that we got the problem and that we're committed to addressing it, and then with, the best go forward on how to get the information we need in order to, flesh out and develop that. That's probably about as realistically as far as we can get in this time frame. But that's not nothing.
So Jeff, I agree with what you said. I will add that, I made the comment earlier that there were some comments by DWR that we felt like, hey, we can clarify what we wrote, but there were others that we felt like, hey, these need to be addressed in a lot more, in a different way and in more detail. And I think one of those is the issue on subsidence, particularly the rate of subsidence, and not just acknowledging what that rate is like we kind of did in the document, but what we're truly going to do about it. And I think that's where the document was lacking last time. And that's not an easy, that's a ongoing discussion that's going to be a bit painful, and there's no magic wand. But the $21 million that the state spent on the Corcoran levy, in my mind, and I don't have any empirical evidence, but in my mind, that put the Tulare Lake subbasin square, in their sights, and there is nothing that they're more focused on than the subsidence issue in my mind. So sorry, that was me just going off on a bit of a rant, but sorry, I think the subsidence issue is the single most important issue that we need to address in this new document.
Amir, who's doing the native yield study for the Tulare Basin?
So that was going to be me and Bob, Carlo. So we've, like I said, we've put that aside at the request of the managers to focus in on the GSP update. We've temporarily postponed it, and we're going to pick it up after the GSP update has been submitted to the state. It's not going away. We're not, it's not like it's just been temporarily put on hold. Part of it too, please keep in mind, is it's going to require a lot of effort and discussions with the GSA managers, and they have day jobs too, and we want to make sure that they have the adequate time to devote to the native yield study as well, while they're trying to do their day jobs and deal with the GSP update. We're all human, and I'm sure some of us, I'm sure some of the GSA managers would like to see their children once in a while. All right. Deanna, anything on Basin Safe to share with the group?
The only thing that I will comment on is that we will have our second quarter invoicing coming out at the end of August. And For those of you who didn't attend the board meeting, the board did approve not debiting any accounts or charging any accounts for the first quarter of calendar year 2023 due to the flooding in the area. We had very little, the basically, and I said this is the board meeting, the calculation and Basin Safe worked very well. The precipitation did its job and offset almost all of the debits that would have occurred, but there were a few accounts, handful of accounts that had some. And after researching it, it was obvious that there was really no groundwater pumping happening during that time. So the board did choose not to charge those accounts or debit those accounts for first quarter. So second quarter will be out on the 23rd. And, you know, if anybody receives an invoice they have questions on, please contact us. It's always, things have worked well, but, you know, there was a lot of precipitation. So it'll be interesting to see how those invoices shake out. That's really, Stacy, did you have anything else on Basin Safe?
Not used to the same unmute thing. No, that's pretty much it.
Great, thanks.
All right, thank you both. I don't see, is Susan on? I don't see her.
No, Susan contacted me. She was unable to make today.
Okay.
Right.
Kathy, do you have an update for the Thule Trust or anything you want to share?
Sure. As most of you know, I'm on the board for the Thule Trust. We just got 2 new board members, Coyote Kadara, who's from the community of Allensworth, is one of our new board members, and then Jim Hurlbutt, who is a retired trust attorney from Visalia. And so we've got a full board again. I think we've reported in the past about the Caponero project, which is funded by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. And for those of you who haven't heard of how that worked, it actually is funding for mitigation requirement from a water rights permit way back in 2001. So the Bureau of Reclamation had to mitigate for delivering water outside the permitted place of use. So this is helping them meet some mitigation requirements that the state board has required of the Bureau. So we're continuing to work on that project, and we'd love to see some other projects similar to it in the basin as we're looking at implementing some of the land repurposing. But the only other thing is that Susan is still looking for interested parties for the Farmer Advisory Committee that's going to help inform the Thule Basin on this multi-benefit land retirement program on projects. So if you've got some projects, some ideas, think about participating in this Farmer Advisory Committee. And Susan, I think, has reached out to all the different GSAs. So I think that's about it.
Did anyone have a question or a comment on anything from the trust? Okay.
Okay.
David, I know you're not on the agenda, but did you want to add is there any updates on from your standpoint from Cal Strategies that you need to share with the group?
There's nothing new as of right now. We did recently send along the most recent legislative updates to Deanna so that she's current with what's going on, and we will be along with Deanna, we'll be making more appointments for other water board members to meet with. The meeting with Dee Dee, from my understanding, Dee Dee Dedyamo, went well. So we will be continuing that. As you know, August is a recess month, so probably not going to be a lot of activity this month. One good thing that's happened for us is that our local assemblyman who covers the Salinas Valley and San Benito County has become speaker, Rivas. And I know him well. Rusty knows him well. In fact, I'm going to be with him tomorrow afternoon. So that is a little bit of an added benefit in that we have a really good relationship with the Speaker of the Assembly.
Yeah, that's always good relationship to have. Absolutely. Good. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Amir.
Deanna, did you want to talk about the West Management area now, or before we get into the recharge discussions, or is that something you want to wait on?
And, I think few people have joined since the beginning of the meeting, but there was a management area that was formerly managed by the Delano Early Mart GSA. It is wide area that is basically covered by the county of Tulare. But as we know, the county of Tulare does not have a GSP. And so it engages in memorandums of understanding with other GSAs to manage wide area. Delano Early Mart chose not to continue their MOU with the county. So we have a portion of the Tule subbasin that's currently unmanaged and not under a GSP. That area, it happens to join Tri-County's boundary area. It is adjacent to, and in some cases in the middle of our current boundary area. So we are in discussion with the board. We haven't had a formal meeting with the board yet, but we're in discussion with, I've met with Sebastian, who's on this call, and Gladstone, which is a large landowner in the area. And so we're talking about it. I will say that I think that the area has already made some strides and have worked towards their own sustainability. I've been impressed with our discussions, and I think that when we have an opportunity to talk to our board, the Tri-County's board with it, I think that we may find some mutual benefit in working together. So.
All right. I'm not seeing any questions. So Stacy, correct me if I get any of this wrong. If you see a hand up that I'm just missing. Sebastian, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to what Deanna said, or if there's anything additional.
No, Deanna, thank you for getting the high points and the main points. Can't turn back the hands of time of what happened, can only look forward. And from Gladstone's perspective, we are 4,600 acres of the 7,300, and so we have a pretty good track record for getting things done and building projects to help our neighbors and ourselves. So that's our commitment. But the other thing I want to point out that the area formerly known as Western Management Area is groundwater dependent, but it's not fully planted wall to wall in permanent crops. About 40% of it is fallowed and or in annual crops. So a lot of work has been done already, and we're prepared to do more work, and the landowners in the area are forward thinking. So I'm available to answer any questions, and thank you all for your time, and we look forward to a brighter future. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sebastian. All right. So if you guys bear with me just a second, as Deanna says, this feels very much like COVID. So I've got to remember how to do all these things remotely. I don't have Stacy to save me this time. Bear with me a second. I'm going to jump into the groundwater recharge policy. Before I do that, I just want to give you guys just a little bit more background. I mentioned it at the beginning of the meeting, but for anybody who wasn't here at the beginning, bottom line is that the emergency policy was always set up to expire at the end of the year. And we know that as we go into the new water year, starting in October, we want to make sure that we have a policy in place that's permanent, that we have a policy in place that's approved by the board, and that we have a policy that you can count on, moving forward as you're all making decisions on bringing in imported water or any other water source to recharge So we know we need to get a more formalized policy, and this is the beginning of that. We really, really would like this group to provide lots of input. You know, this is your opportunity. As I said, this is strictly the very start of it. We just had this conversation at the board meeting just a few weeks ago, and we've just started to put things together. One of the things that I will say that we did is we did reach out to some of our neighboring GSAs to better understand what their groundwater recharge policies are. And as much as we can, we'd like to mirror those, just so there's some consistency across the sub-basin. I'm not saying we have to do exactly what Lower Tule or anything, anyone else did, but as much as possible, I think it makes sense to try and mirror those so that growers and others that are trying to negotiate deals for this water, they're not looking at trying to have a completely different set of rules in one place and a 180-degree difference set of rules somewhere else. So just keep that in mind as we're kind of having some of these discussions, and these are again very preliminary. We just started putting this document together, and it's in you'll see that it's we've made a little bit of progress, but there's a lot more to be done. And all of you will have an opportunity to have lots of input on this. So if you bear with me a second, I'm going to mute myself and try to figure out and bring up the appropriate screen. Stacy, tell me that worked.
Very good, Amir.
I all of a sudden I felt like I was back in 2020 again. All of a sudden I was having this flashback to COVID. Okay, so some of the general issues that we would love to get your input on as a group. The obvious one is, and this is this is where the rubber really meets the road here, is where are we going to allow for the value that is going to be accepted for the recharge? Is that if you divert 100 acre-feet, and as that water moves across in canals and conveyance systems, and you have losses, and let's just say for the sake of discussion that we end up with 80 acre-feet that's actually being recharged. There is certainly that 15% losses. Do we give you as a surface water importer into the area? Does the GSA give the importer the credit for that loss? So we would base everything on a discussion of 100 acre-feet, which is the amount diverted. And there is definitely some precedence for this. I will say that in the coordination agreement for the Tule sub-basin, the large importers, the districts that are importing water into the Tule subbasin from the Frank Kern, those losses in those canals, and not in the Frank Kern, but at the point, after the point of diversion, the coordination agreement essentially gives them that water, and that losses are their water. And so if we were to mirror something like that in our recharge policy, we would essentially say that you would be given credit for the amount diverted, and then separate from that, there, Tri-County may require a leave behind. So that to me is probably the major issue that needs to be decided in this document. There are other issues of, how we're going to measure, what kind of reporting requirements we're going to have, what type of information you need to provide Tri-County on the recharge facility itself. So unlike, for example, Lower Tule, where, the district, not the GSA, but the district owns recharge facilities, they have an understanding of exactly what kind of recharge they expect out of their facilities. If this is done at a landowner level, do we, what kind of information are we going to require you to provide? So, are we going to ask you to make sure that these systems are engineered and that you have, you've done some percolation type tests and you've done other type of testing, and you need to provide those types of informations to the GSA, and we would review and approve, some of those issues. So I think that reporting, how we're going to measure, those types of details still need to be worked out and thought through. And obviously we want your input on that too. But I think truly the main issue is when we are talking credit, is it at the point of diversion? If the point of diversion is outside of Tri-County, which it most likely will be, and a big portion of the conveyance is through Delano Early Mart. I'll just pick on Delano. Is Tri-County giving you credit for those losses, right? So if half of your losses occur in Delano Early Mart, should you get Tri-County credits for that? And so, like I said, these are not necessarily technical issues. These are a lot of policy type discussion that we would love to hear from you all, and try to see, if we can reach some type of consensus, and something that it has to ultimately result in, we have to protect Tri-County's ability to meet its Sigma requirements. So we want to avoid anything that's going to hurt us in our ability to achieve and maintain our minimum thresholds. And more importantly, though, we also have to make sure that whatever policy we have in place is going to minimize impacts, because I'd hate to go ahead and get our document revised, get out of probation and back to DWR, and then turns out that our impacts are such that puts us right back into the state board. So avoiding impacts, avoiding dropping below minimum thresholds, other things like that. So there's that trade-off of being, we understand that there's a cost to importing water, but we also understand, we also need the growers and everybody that is importing to understand that we have to be able to meet our requirements under Sigma as well. All right, so I just threw a whole bunch of information out at all of you. Let me take a breath and ask you, if you guys have comments, if you have concerns, if you have some ideas, whatever, this is always a tough part for me, because I really hope to get these to be a little bit more interactive, but if I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but Carlo, I know Angela obviously is bringing water in now. And, you know, you probably have some thoughts on how that credit should be handled. And you're still on mute, by the way, if I, just to remind you. So I'm not, you know, I'm not asking you to, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Carlo, but I'm just wondering if, you know, if you had some thoughts on how you would like to see that handled.
Amir, I do have thoughts. They are not all necessarily beneficial to the landowners in either Angelo or Tri-County. Let me just touch on one. You mentioned the loss. A large portion of our water comes from the Kings River. Last year, we only got down here with 2/3. I'm doing a little rounding. But I don't think, I mean, I think it's nice that we talk about having credits for a portion of that third that we lost, but I don't really think that it's appropriate. That's some of the groundwater that we've developed a right to pump over time. If we start accounting for every acre foot or teaspoon of water, we'll run into all kinds of issues. How does it move from where it's seeped into the Kings River down to where we extract it in the Tri-Counties areas, those sorts of things. So I guess at this point, my comments are, this is extremely complicated. Not that you don't already know that.
Yeah, no, Carl, I appreciate that comment very much so, because you know, it always sounds nice to say, hey, let's come up with a policy, but the devil's in the details, right? And we'd have to make sure that any policy we come up with is not going to hinder Tri-County from being able to achieve its you know, sustainability goals.
Another observation I might make is this year is clearly extremely wet, a flood year. And because of that, we're all talking about trying to get as much water into the ground as we can, because we have, in essence, not unlimited, but extremely a larger supply of water than what we can utilize. But in my mind, in most years of normal water supply, I think to the extent that Angelo Water District, who's a portion of Tri-County, we would deliver that water directly on the surface. And that enables you to not pump water from the ground. So in my mind, the recharge policies will have a whole lot more meaning in the years of excess supply, which are what, 1 in 5-ish.
Yeah. You know, one thing, Carl, and this is not necessarily true everywhere, but one of the things that we did see in the even in the dry drought years is that when sometimes when there is water released, because the release occurs over a short amount of time, not all the water can be utilized, and it's not necessarily used to the highest benefit. So there is some thinking about, you know, how do we encourage that? How do we continue to encourage, even in the dry years, you know, the water being utilized fully? I think you know, there are some issues of water rights and all those types of things that do come into play, but it may not be as clean as I'm making it sound. But there are definitely some even issues in the dry years that we'd like to make sure that we're addressing in this policy. I do want to make it clear that this is a recharge policy, as Carl just said, and not just about applying water for ag purposes. You know, we do realize in the dry years, if you divert water, you're trying to use those as much as you can for ag purposes and not really concerned about its recharge. All right, thank you, Carl. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else, but I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I don't think so. I'd like to have some one-on-one with you rather than
Sure.
wax philosophically this morning.
Anybody else have any thoughts on what Tri-County should at least consider on the recharge policy? So this would be the replacement again for the emergency policy. And if there are things about the emergency policy that you liked, please let us know that, because the purpose of the recharge policy is to encourage recharge while protecting and allowing Tri-County to meet its sustainable goals. Deanna, go ahead.
Yes, in light of the conversation, so two things from my perspective. One, what Carlos says is true, and this may be an instance where we have to treat the Tulare Lake subbasin and the Tule subbasins recharge policy differently. But the coordination agreement very clearly gave those importers all of their imported water. And there were those of us who didn't agree with that, and maybe still don't. Philosophically, Carlo, maybe that's still philosophically not something that should have been done. But regardless, it is in the coordination agreement. So from my perspective, if you're an importer of water in the Tule subbasin, those losses should be treated the same way as the large diverters are treated, no different. And then, again, we may have to have a caveat for the Tulare Lake subbasin, but we haven't done the native yield study over there, so we don't currently know how those losses are going to be handled in Tulare Lake. So, it may be something where we adopt a policy that has, credits those losses to the diverter, but we may have to change that once the native yield study is completed in the Tulare Lake subbasin. And those are just my thoughts. I don't want to discourage landowners from purchasing and bringing in water. And from my perspective, they shouldn't be treated any different than any other importer in the Tule subbasin.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. Like I said, there is certainly precedence in that coordination agreement that makes it, that makes sense. And if we follow that, and look, frankly, it's expensive. If we don't have this huge source of water coming in, it's surface import water coming in, there's not a district bringing in a bunch of water. So if a landowner decides that they're going to do this on their own, we want to encourage recharge, and we realize that it's an expensive, so the higher the value of the allocation that they can receive, it certainly would make the project a lot more attractive if they were to move in that direction. Okay, so
Amir, I did have a question. I'm sorry.
yeah, absolutely, Sebastian. Yeah, please.
And I don't see it here on the screen, but what is the kind of thoughts on carrying over water?
Yep, great question. I'm very glad you asked that. That's always been that's been one of the sticking points is how much do you get to carry over year to year, right? You put in 100 acre feet this year. Is it 100 acre feet? And you don't, let's say it's a wet year, like Carl mentioned this year, we don't pump any water. We meet our requirements from surface water. That 100-foot of recharge is a full 100-foot available for you, 100 acre feet available for you next year, in 3 years, and 4 years, and 5 years. And is there any any amount that we would as a GSA start to decrease that, or put a full time limit on that, hey, you have to use it in this timeline. Otherwise, 20% goes away year to year, or, within 5 years, it's gone. And we had some language to that effect in one of the drafts of the emergency recharge policy. And so I'm glad you asked that, because that is, again, one of those sticking points that we do need to make a decision on. And again, Dan, I don't know if you have some thoughts that you want to share with the group, but I will tell you, my experience is that you probably should have some kind of timeline to say you have to use the water in X amount of time. Otherwise, it starts to decrease in your account. I don't want to be punitive, and I don't think the GSA at all wants to be punitive. But on the other hand, groundwater moves. It moves naturally, and to be able to say that water is going to be yours forever seems, I have a little bit of heartburn with that. But ultimately, this is a policy decision that the GSA and the board needs to make. So Sebastian, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. That is definitely one of the, I think we probably should check a little bit closer with what Lower Tule and Eastern Tule and Delano are doing, and try to see if we can do something close to what they're doing on the carryover issue. If they're all giving you credit over an extended period, again, Tri-County doesn't want to be punitive, and it doesn't, it wants to, as much as we can, match up with what everybody else in the sub-basin are doing.
Amir, it's interesting. If between our groundwater sources and our surface sources, we were in balance, in concept, you could hang on to that water for a very long time. Because really the groundwater supply in a conjunctively managed scheme is just it's the surge basin or the shock absorber.
Right.
But I think what you said, that there should be a time, is because we're all operating in overdrafted basins, and really that water at some point will be gone, because it's used by those that are using, that aren't in balance,
Yes.
including ourselves. I'll throw that out as well, but it brings me back to how complicated it is, and yeah, we're making policies that as soon as we ink them, we'll start to find issues with them.
Yeah. Yeah, the policies will definitely be a work in progress, and will need to be updated and modified to represent whatever the current conditions and understanding are. That's a good point about being in overdraft, Carlo, because I think you're absolutely right. If you're putting in 100 acre feet and I'm pumping in excess of my allocation next door to you, then that 100 acre feet has been already subtracted from the groundwater aquifer, and it's still on paper on Carlo's account. But the fact that I've done the overdraft means that the water level in that area is not improving. And if it continues to decrease, we still have impacts, we still have MTs, we still have all of the issues with the Sigma issues, and you're not achieving sustainability goals. It's not helping you. Yeah, on paper, you might be, it might look good on paper, but in reality, you still have all of those impacts. And that means we're not, we're not doing what we need to do. So Carl's point about the overdraft is a good one. If we can get down to closer to those,
Excuse me.
bless you, to those sustainability goals, then we might be having a very different conversation.
This is a bit like a young person contributing to Social Security.
Yeah, yeah.
Only the contributions are gone before they get to the age where
Right.
they can utilize them. Sorry for going a little bit off topic.
That's a good
That's a
analogy.
good one.
I think if I could, I think Carl makes a good point, but you want to make sure that that young person pays in, right? If there's not an incentive for that young person to pay in, then the whole system collapses. And so the same thing, we want to encourage folks to put water into the ground to recharge. And if they don't have some assurance that they'll be able to pick that back up again, then there really is not an incentive to do it.
Right.
So that you have that tension there. So I do think they need to be able to carry it over and be able to utilize it. And then one of the other problems with putting a hard deadline on when they have to take it out, and I don't have a solution to this, but you can visualize that as you move through time, there becomes a point, if there's a hard deadline on this, where it's a use it or lose it.
Right.
And if you get into a use it or lose it, and there's no attention being paid to what kind of year you're in. I mean, you'd hate to have a wet year, but someone, with I got to pump this water or I'm going to lose access to it. So I think some flexibility and thought needs to be put into that. And, some of these early GSAs that put in plans, I look at the Lower Tule and Pixleys where they kind of did it in five year blocks. They kind of created cliffs for themselves. I didn't say too much about it at the time because 5 years at that time seemed like a long ways away. And I figured human nature being what it was, as we moved through time and we got closer to those end of those 5 year periods, and if there was a lot of water that was in people's accounts, human nature would put pressure. Those boards are very connected to their landowners. I mean, they're very connected, and they'll work it out. Because I don't really think that folks who spent money and time and effort putting water physically into the ground are going to believe that it's very fair on a date certain where that all gets just wiped out because of a policy and not any thought. So we're later in this process here in Tri-County. And so I think we can maybe learn and think about how to create a structure where there is carryover that respects, the fact that this water probably is still moving and will not stay indefinitely physically underneath you. So there has to be some accounting for that, but also not create a cliff at a date certain where there'd be a big wipeout of the efforts that everybody did, because I think that would be a real negative on incentivizing people to do something you want them to do.
They're related to exactly what Jeff is saying is we'd have to also agree on the in Basin Safe, which bucket of water you're utilizing. So if you were to put this recharge credit in there, and again, Stacy and Deanna, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the current Basin Safe programming would take water out of the any groundwater credits first before it takes it out of sustainable yield.
No, I believe it's sustainable yield and the credits.
Okay.
Yeah, currently it's set up a priority of use of sustainable yield, then landowner developed credits, and the recharge policy would go into the landowner developed credits. But as we move through this, if we see a flaw in the priority of use, that might be something that we should address as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, Jeff, I think that's a very good point. Sebastian, I'm going to turn your question back on you and say, do you have any thoughts or comments or opinions on how, the carryover should be handled?
Yeah, no, I think there's two schools of thoughts out there. For Gladstone's perspective, we could want to be good neighbors, of course, and we'll work with whatever policies we can work with, but there are two schools of thoughts that there is no carryover limits, and then there are some folks that defer to the water code with respect to forfeiture for a 5-year limit. Now there's one GSA in the area that has an even tougher, narrower ramp down schedule than that, and I don't no comment on that schedule, but it's either the no limit or the 5-year limit, and I think those are, you can work with them, and the no limit I guess is easier to work with, but 5-year we could make it work if that's the case.
Yeah, so these are, as you guys can tell from this discussion, these are not easy. There's not a quote unquote correct answer. It really is a consensus and an agreement between the landowners and the board, and saying, okay, how do we balance all of these competing concerns and try to come up with a good policy? But it also highlights the issue that a good policy needs to be in place, because you've got to make decisions, and these are very expensive decisions. Buying this water, bringing it, moving it is all very costly, and if it's at the end of the day, if you end up at I'm going to make the number $1,000 an acre foot import, well, in a wet year that's a terrible deal, but in a dry year that may not be such a bad deal. And again, keep in mind that the one thing that we haven't talked about is you can do the import and then have the ability to trade that credit to others as well. Dan, I'm going to put you on the spot just for a second. If I trade my owner derived credit to Jeff, I'm just going to pick on him. Does Jeff also, does it show up on his account as a owner derived credit, and it would and then in the pecking order, priority order, would it be subtracted in based on that?
Goes to the same bucket.
Goes to the same.
So if it was a landowner developed credit, it would go to a landowner developed credit. If you're
Okay.
trading your sustainable yield, it goes to their sustainable yield.
Okay. Okay, so that's, that helps. That at least keeps it in the same bucket. I think that's important. Okay, any other comments from anybody? I'm not trying to cut this short, except it's 11:20, and I promise I'd try to get you out of one of these meetings on time. I don't see anybody's hands. I would encourage, the last word on this, I would encourage all of you to start thinking about this. I would encourage you, if you have landowners in your areas, neighbors, whoever, to make them aware that Tri-County is in the process of developing this policy, and that pick up the phone and call Deanna and have that discussion, and make sure your voice is heard on this. And if there are things you like, great, we want to hear the good too, but if there's something that you feel strongly needs to be modified or removed from the policy, if you think that one of our neighbors has a great policy, tell us that. If you think they have an absolutely lousy policy, we want to hear that too. So please, pick up the phone, call Deanna, and have that conversation with her. Okay. Moving on, last two things quickly in 9 minutes. The MLRP, we kind of talked about that already. Deanna already mentioned the fact that the outreach group is looking for a farmer advisory committee member. So please, if you have any interest just contact Deanna and she'll put you in touch with Susan and get you the application. Regardless of being on that advisory committee or not, the MLRP group is setting up some workshops. They are setting up some additional outreach efforts. The bottom line of those outreach efforts is to make sure that we understand everyone's concerns, but ultimately is to develop a project list. And that's, you know, at the end of the day, that's really what we want to get out of the outreach efforts. I mean, some of it is obviously educational, but some of it is ultimately to develop that project list to address those concerns, those comments, and the issues that have been identified. So this is your opportunity really to make sure that if you have existing projects that you think should be built as part of the MLRP process, that's great. That's even better because, you know, then we've got a project.
Yeah.
But if you just, you know, get involved and be able to say, hey, you know, our concern is still this, and they really do need to hear everything. It can't just be from you know, one interest group or the other. We really want to make sure that the ag interests are represented on the MLRP efforts as well. And you know, if you're saying, look, for us as ag, we really are more concerned about you know, new supply, then they need to hear that too, because projects need to be focused on supply then. So please, if you see, you know, we're sharing our distribution lists with them. I know you don't want to get any more emails. You're probably all inundated with a bunch of emails, but if you do start to see MLRP outreach efforts, workshops, things like that, save the dates, all those types of things you are likely to pop up in that email effort. Kathy, again, there'll probably be hybrid meetings, right? So you can attend in person and on remotely.
Via Zoom, yeah.
Yeah.
And they'll be in the evening.
So the idea there is get your voices heard, and you know, ultimately, let's see if we can build some projects that are going to be beneficial to the sub-basin and to Tri-County as well. The Tri-County specific plan, I have to hang my head in shame and say that I have not done much on that. We have been focused on a lot of other GSP issues and other things. But Deanna has given me some marching orders to make sure that I do put that back on the front burner. And again, it's not myself who's preparing the document. It's, you know, other staff from our firm. I just need to, you know, make sure that everybody's got that on their front burner. And we're coordinating closely with the overall core plan, which is the general plan that the group is developing for the entire sub-basin, and then we're developing a very specific plan. And again, if it, from an outreach effort, this is where I really would like all of you to weigh in on the specific plan, because if we're going to retire land, we really want to make sure that there's policies in place to be able to reuse that land for something else, and that what's in place is not hindering that. So if it makes sense at some point for some of you, for whatever economic reasons, to retire some land, there should be incentives and other things in place for you to you know, redevelop that property as something else, and that continues to create economic benefits for the area. Okay, I got 5 minutes, Kathy.
Right.
Preparing the draft mitigation. So there's a groundwater quality, a well mitigation plan for domestic wells going dry. That is in effect and is currently in place. Again, Deanna, remind me, but we haven't received any applications as far as I know, which is a good thing. You know,
Applications.
yeah, in a wet year, that's a good thing. But we're going to do something similar to the well mitigation program. We're going to do something to address what the GSA's role is going to be in terms of groundwater quality. And of course, as I've said several times already, we want to coordinate with our neighboring GSAs as well on that. Okay. A few upcoming meeting dates. I already mentioned for you some of the State Water Board meetings and reporting back to this group on those discussions and how the outcomes of those meetings. I know many of you will be very anxious to hear that and how we're going to follow up on those discussions with the State Water Board. But our next advisory committee meeting is on August 23rd, which is obviously after both meetings has occurred, which will be perfect because that'll give us an opportunity to fill you in on those. And then the next Tri-County Board meeting is September 7th. Those meetings are from 1 o'clock. Yeah, they start at 1. I was getting mixed up between this meeting and the board meeting, but yes, the board meeting starts at 1 in the afternoon at the Tri-County offices. So if you can attend, please do so. And if they can also remote in on those board meetings. Again, to be a broken record, the board really does need to hear your voice. So I would encourage all of you to attend, make comments, let the board know, especially on the recharge policy. The board should hear directly from all of you as well as we're putting it together. We want to hear your comments, but I think you would do yourself, it would be good for all of you to either comment to the board or send a written comment to the board on the recharge policy.
And on the recharge policy, I mean, I hope before the next advisory committee meeting, we'll have, you know, a document of at least some more bullet points to review. And then maybe a draft document at the September meeting or bullet points to review before the board. And then something for adoption at the November meeting. So we'll be working through those things in the next timeline. And I'd like to have something in place and adopted before the end of the year so that when we move into this next wet season, we have something a little more substantial than last year's policy.
Yeah. All right, that wraps up our meeting. Does anyone have any final questions or comment before we wrap this up for good?
Just a comment. I really appreciate Sebastian being here, and you know, this is I think Sebastian's comment about we can't change the past and we got to look to the future were very wise comments, and I have to commend Deanna and your team over there on your openness, and Carlo to considering the needs of your neighbors. So hopefully something good can come of what's been a pretty challenging situation.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right, everybody. Thank you. I'm going to give you back a minute of your day.
Right.
Amir, can you hang
everyone.
on for a second?